Great, thanks. Yeah, so this is a meeting of the Steering Committee of the Vermont Climate Council. Thanks everybody for coming. Any questions on the agenda before we dive in? Okay, let's dive in. There are minutes from the last. Here, I'll just click through on the screen while we're talking. This is from our last meeting, where we talked, you can see them here. The biggest piece of these notes is, right, your reflections on what you wanted for future steering committee meetings. Okay, any questions on these minutes? Any concerns or friendly amendments to them? Okay, I'll consider them approved. Thanks so much. All right, so let's jump into this council next meeting date. I'll just leave the screen share just for 1 second so you can see these dates. And Secretary Moore, you can help here, but there is a veto session scheduled for precisely the dates where we were going to meet. The last time you all as a steering committee met around this, you thought it would probably be better to postpone the council meeting, not only because of the conflict of that specific date, but because you would be able to understand better what happened in the session in terms of climate, and then we could update the council better on the legislative session, and sort of that's a starting place as well for the cap revision process. So that was the last conversation you had. And please, anyone correct me if you understood your conversation differently. So with the veto session, wanting to give a little space to let all that happen and then prepare something meaningful for the council, we're suggesting July 8th as a date, which is the Monday after the 4th of July week. And if that's the case, we should meet as the steering committee to prep up that conversation. There were some other things that you had wanted to prep as well. So steering committee members, how does that sound for a revision to the date, and then as well schedule another meeting for yourselves? That sound okay? Any friendly amendments to that?
I would just express a preference for the steering committee to meet on the 10th as opposed to the 17th, just because I think I will have the potential to be tied up on the 17th. And currently, as you may have heard, Secretary Clauser announced she'll be stepping down at the end of the month. And her interim, I don't know, would want to step into this for that sort of purpose.
Got it. Okay. All right, so let's look at the 10th for our next meeting, and then July 8th for the council's next meeting. So June 10th for us, July 8th for the council. Does that sound workable for everybody? All right, Callie says thumbs up. Yeah, Jared?
Sorry, David, I just had a question. I had originally had, and maybe it got deleted, a meeting of the steering committee on my calendar for June 24th, that day. And I'm just wondering whether we would want to, I totally hear and agree with Secretary Moore about not meeting on the 17th, but I wonder if that original 24th date that we were holding gives us enough time to both have more clarity and then finalize that agenda ahead of July 8th. It feels like meeting on June 10th is a very quick succession to this one. But if there's a reason why we need to do it, about a month in advance, I'm certainly open to doing it on the 10th. I was just wondering.
Yeah.
David, this is Jane.
Yeah, hey, Jane.
Sorry, because I'm in transit, I couldn't raise my hand, but the conversation we're going to have after the components with the co-chairs is around the CAP kickoff events. And there was an interest to make sure that the steering committee came back together again before those events.
Okay,
which you'll see in greater detail when Sophie and I walk through that after the co-chair updates.
thanks, Jane.
And I will say also, Jared, just for somewhat selfish reasons, I'm off that week, so it would be
Okay.
challenging for me to be helpful.
No, I'm totally good with the 10th. I just wanted to raise the question.
That's a good question. All right, so can we just then, everyone, are we comfortable? June 10th for our next meeting, July 8th, we'll switch the council to that meeting, to that date. All good? Okay, Bram says thumbs up. Great. Okay, thanks, folks. That's wonderful. All right. Next, co-chair updates and discussion. I see a bunch of co-chairs here. That's wonderful. We did not have an order to this. So I can just make one up on the fly right now. I also wanted to drop in the chat the 3 questions that we had put in the agenda. They're not cutting and pasting for me right now, but they are, the 3 questions are: where are you in your process? And what are your next steps? The second one, I realize those are 2 questions in one. The second question is, what are the big substantial topics that are emerging? Again, this is not comprehensive, but just sort of, in the very early stages, what's rising up to the top. And there's a third question that's about any tools or support that you need from the Climate Action Office or from fellow counselors or from others, sort of what help do you need? So those are the sort of 3 biggies. The first is sort of where are you at in your process and where are you headed? What's emerging at the top of sort of substance in your work? And what tools or support do you need? Again, in 5 minutes, it's kind of a quick hit. So I'm happy to start anywhere. I wonder, Rich, if you want to kick us off with cross-sector, and give us the 5 minutes on that. And then my hope is if there's some quick clarifying questions, and Melissa, sorry, I didn't see. If there's some quick clarifying questions, that's great. But I'd love to sort of run through all of these and then have a discussion about what you're hearing and sort of what might be missing or that kind of conversation. So Rich and Melissa, why don't you take it away for cross-sector, and then we'll move on from there.
Okay, good morning, everybody. And Melissa and I have not coordinated this report, but I'll start and invite her to add or comment or whatever. So the cross-sector has had a couple of meetings, and we've decided, to begin logically by going through the previous cap and to take stock where we are. In terms of how we intend to work, we discussed it pretty carefully, the idea of continuing with the idea of these informal task groups to help support the committee. But we were very clear in making it clear that they are not decision-making bodies. They are the equivalent of a staff working group, frankly, that's going to take direction from the full committee about what issues to look into, examine those issues, and come back with information and recommendations for the committee to think about. And logically, we have in our last meeting discussed the creation of 3 working groups: one on thermal, one on transportation, one on electricity. There will be the need for one or more committee members to sort of track the multi-state cap and trade, cap and invest examination that's going on and keep the committee well informed on that. I don't know if we'll call that a work group or it's just one or more committee members who will, follow that process, follow the study that's going to be commissioned, and report back to the committee. The unmet needs, I guess you'd say, things we haven't figured out or we haven't launched yet, are in the area of linkages to the other committees. And we've, as you know, the council has made a commitment to have representatives of other committees sitting on cross-sector, and we don't yet, we haven't yet organized the process of taking input from the other committees and maybe engaging in kind of more of a dialogue with those committees, ag and ecosystems, just transitions, resilience, and we really would like to make sure that we get good input from those committees concerning the way their policies, their policy ideas or concerns would feed into the assessment of our emissions and the assessment of strategies to reduce emissions. Specifically, we also feel that compared to last time, obviously there's going to be more public engagement early in the process than there was last time. We also need more input from key affected stakeholders, and we'd like to hear from them up front. There was a concern, for example, that Liz Miller, reminded us of, that the electric utilities would like to have an opportunity to explain what's going on in the power sector and where they think they're headed and what we should have in mind as we consider the next cap. And as soon as you realize that, yeah, that's a good idea, then there are others whom we should obviously hear from, who are, directly affected by the work and the policies that we might be considering. And that would be true also in the building sector, in weatherization, energy efficiency, the gas company, the fuel dealers, not to mention the input that we'd like to get with respect to impacts on equity and the information that other sectors want to bring to us. One unsettled point is the degree to which cross-sector should or should not be looking at mitigation with respect to the agriculture and forestry resources. And we have, last time took the position that ag and ecosystems was going to be handling that. And I think this is a steering committee or a full council issue. I'm not, the cross-sector just brought it up. We didn't decide anything. We assumed that ag and ecosystems would be taking the lead in those areas, but we just want to make sure it doesn't become just a hole that nobody addresses. And
Rich, we're getting awfully close to that 5-minute mark.
okay, I'm fine. I think that's it. And Melissa, please add or correct what I just said.
Sure. No, I think Rich covered it pretty well, and I know we're at time. So just really quickly, the only thing I would add is there seemed to be our last subcommittee meeting, we went over the climate action progress tracking spreadsheet, and there seemed to be a keen interest from subcommittee members in really digging into like quantifiable impact from those actions, maybe not necessarily at an individual level, but either individually or looking at kind of, I tied it back to our business as usual forecast. So for subcommittee members to really be able to understand what's the impact of the recommendations we've already made and how are we doing in progress towards the GWSA requirements. So, and I think that one fits into what tools support do you need most. I think we'd be looking to the Climate Action Office to give us some of that information.
Thanks, Melissa.
Melissa, that's a great ad, and I would also say there was a fair amount of interest expressed for getting support from the Climate Action Office just in the organization and our ability to convene ourselves and hold meetings.
Okay. Great. Thank you. And I wonder if that is a nice segue over to ag and ecosystem, folks. So would you all like to take it away? And I'll leave it up to the two of you how you want to manage that.
Sure. Would you like me to go first, or would you like to kick it off?
I can start.
Great.
It was so it was our first meeting, and it was only for an hour. We had some technical difficulties. Some members couldn't use the microphone. So we basically spent the time introducing ourselves and then did a quick overview of the progress tracking doc and scheduled our next meeting, which will be on June 27th and will be 2 hours rather than an hour. And I'm hoping that then we can really delve into each recommendation and review it. I don't know, Billy, what else did we?
Yeah, I think that was great. Thank you. Unlike some of the other subcommittees, Ag and Eco was more or less dormant for the past 6 or 8 months. So we have not met since shortly after, when the biomass recommendations were being wrapped up however long ago. So we got together with a significant number of new members. And yeah, I think our focus is to look at the progress report, the tracker, to hear about any additional studies or analyses that have occurred since we met last, and then really start to hone in on prioritization and any gaps that might exist. Appreciating that Ag and Eco has put forward by far the most recommended actions in the first plan. I personally feel like our bases are pretty well covered, and now we should turn to prioritization of those actions. But we'll see what the rest of the group thinks.
Okay. And just Billy, taking advantage of what Rich's comment was, have you all sketched out the sort of topical things you're going to work on, and is mitigation of emissions part of that?
We haven't really focused on those priorities yet. I think that will probably be a focus of our next meeting. As my co-chair indicated, I think that our first meeting was really just a brief kickoff of like getting to know everyone and getting some footing on the work. So we'll dig in a more substantive way at our next meeting. And I think the ag emissions issue is one that there's certainly members who have a lot of interest in. There's been some analysis that has occurred since the last plan was concluded. So my hope is that we'll dig into that. I know that last time around, I think that we got a little bit hung up on the question of like net versus gross reductions. And hopefully we can kind of move on from that question with some focus around actions.
Sounds great. Okay. Either of you, Jael, Billy, anything else you'd want to add?
No, I just I might have mumbled a little bit, but our next meeting is June 27th, not the 2nd.
Got it. Okay. Super.
I guess the only other thing I would add is, I do think, as I said earlier, we're in a little bit of a unique position with the sheer volume of actions that the subcommittee had recommended initially. So, and there's fewer metrics in the GWSA related to the adaptation and resilience, especially for natural working lands. So we may ultimately need some assistance with figuring out what a prioritization rubric looks like and how we really harness that. I know we struggled with it last time around, and had some members who felt very strongly that nothing should be prioritized, that everything's a priority. So we're going to need to kind of navigate that same question again. And to the extent we can, if anyone has tools or ideas of how we can do that, that would be welcomed.
Yeah. Yeah. And let's talk about that in just a moment, because I think one of the things for the next meeting of the steering committee is to go over a sort of updated draft of that prioritization rubric that Jane and I and others aim to be working on in the next couple of weeks. Okay. Rural resilience. Let me pass it over to you all.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll kick it off. David, chime in if you want to. We've held 2 meetings. We kind of feel like we're in the same boat. We hadn't met before putting together a response to the speaker's letter in the fall. The subcommittee hadn't met for almost a year, I think, and we've got 2 new co-chairs, so we're definitely in a bit of a forming phase. We might be on our way to norming. We haven't met too much. We've held 2 meetings. We called it a level set meeting just to kind of get our feet under us again, and then a benchmarking meeting where we heard from about the state hazard mitigation plan, the resilience implementation strategy, and just sort of where we are with climate in Vermont from Leslie Ann and Jay Schaefer. So that was our benchmarking. We have developed a draft work plan. I was trying to drop something in the chat, but I'm unable to do that for some reason. But so just a subgroup has been working on a draft work plan to sort of lay out what we want to achieve in each of our meetings, thinking that we'll meet monthly through August and probably have some task groups working in that time. So we're going to continue to kind of flesh out that work plan as we go and hopefully have that pretty well finalized in June. What is emerging for us, I think, is already been talked about a little bit with cross-sector, but we really feel like there needs to be some scope or bookends or lanes, or whatever, however you want to define it, for the subcommittees, and that there's going to be a need for coordination between the co-chairs for that. I don't know if it's going to be able to be achieved just by having liaison on each subcommittee, or if we should maybe have like a focused group of co-chairs that sort of sets up those lanes, because there's so many actions, like Billy was talking to, so many actions, and I really feel like we need to narrow that down. And we have I think a tremendous amount of overlap in the actions right now, and I think it would make everybody's work a lot easier and more clear if we could kind of set that from the beginning. So we're calling that like a crosswalk. We'll definitely have co-chairs in. We've scheduled some, in our work plan, have that scheduled for this summer to work with the co-chairs and make sure that we're kind of staying in our lane. That's something that has come up for us, where some members feel like we're talking about mitigation, others feel like we're talking about resilience, and it feels really big right now. So I think we're going to need some support either for the subcommittee or task groups for facilitation of exercises that we can do to narrow it down. We have some people who are, really like facilitating and doing these sorts of exercises. So we're going to meet this week to figure out if we can do that on our own, but I anticipate needing those services to help us get where we want to be. And the same with engagement. I think everybody, all the different subcommittees, want to go out and hear from different stakeholders. I think we should coordinate on who those stakeholders are. I know, the Climate Action Office is doing a lot of outreach. I think we need to be kind of organized on how we're doing that.
Love it. Okay.
Right.
And for Andrea and David, are there, when you think about the sort of lanes and the bookends and the areas where it's trickiest right now, you made quick reference, Andrea, to like, hey, are we doing sort of emissions reductions in rural areas as well as resilience and adaptation? Is that the big one, or are there other areas where you're sensing like it would be helpful to have a brighter line?
That's the issue that I brought to our last committee meeting, because issues in terms of reducing Vermont's carbon footprint and resolving those issues are different than resilience, which is to deal and protect against the effects of what climate change brings, weather-wise or in the natural world, the effect that it has. My argument was that if you have both prongs, both directions as a responsibility, it's too much. It's just flat out too much. The issues are too broad, too complex, and they, in some ways do not overlap each other. So I at least wanted to have the discussion. And one of the things about facilitation, there was discussion about using a nominal priority process, regardless of whether we're dealing with resilience or reduction, individually or together, that we need some kind of priority work to reduce the targets, if you will, for actions called for by this committee.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a level of comfort for some of our committee members. The way resilience is defined in the GWSA includes individuals. So if you're doing weatherization, you're providing resilience for people, but you're also doing mitigation. So there's that crossover. And I think we just need to provide the confidence that this isn't, we're not dismissing this as an important thing. We just need to figure out which subcommittee that comes from and how it gets into the climate action plan.
Got it.
Yeah, because this earlier Richard mentioned it as consideration with cross sector. So you got at least two committees that are saying, wait a minute, who's responsible for this, and is it reasonable for us to do it?
I want to keep that thought alive. And as we hear from the other subcommittees, then I want to circle back to it, because I think this is a great conversation that we can start having even today, right? With you all on the call with the steering committee. Before I jump, Andrea, David, anything else you want to share? Is that good? Oh, good.
No, what
Okay.
she said.
What she said, excellent. All right. So that brings us to science and data and just transitions. Why don't we start with science and data, and we'll finish up with just transitions. So Jared, and I completely
Colin.
forgot who Jared's Colin is. Sorry. Yes.
Colin, do you want to start, or would you like me to? I'm happy either way.
I'd say go ahead, Jared, and I can fill in anything if that works for you.
Okay, thanks, Colin. So, the Science and Data Subcommittee, we've been meeting fairly regularly over the past few months with a real focus on updating. Folks will remember the last climate action plan. There's that whole section on the scientific underpinnings of the CAP, and a number of those things we've identified need to be updated. So one is around where do we stand when it comes to a number of the metrics that we have to track, both in the Climate Action Plan and related to the Global Warming Solutions Act. That includes greenhouse gas emissions. And a couple of months ago, we had a great, we did a process of review and feedback and hearing a presentation regarding a supplemental life cycle emissions analysis. And our next step on the emissions side, Colin is, as I understand it, hard at work on the latest update to the statewide greenhouse gas inventory. And we will be discussing some proposed methodological and kind of data input updates as part of that process. The other big part of the scientific underpinning of the CAP, beyond kind of the greenhouse gas inventory and the methodology around tracking our emissions, was establishing for the state a social cost of carbon and social cost of greenhouse gases. When we wrote the first climate action plan, there was a federal interagency working group underway to update the established social costs of greenhouse gases to reflect the latest science following the recommendations of the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. And that came out in November. So we heard a presentation from the lead author of that report from the Environmental Protection Agency. And our next step is, one of our next steps will be considering proposed updates to that as a committee then to share with the full council. The other big thing that we haven't really begun yet, except to identify that we are going to need to focus on it, is review of the updates to new pathways modeling, updated pathways modeling. There's a lot of new, our first set of pathways, both trajectories to meet our legal obligations and where we think we stand in terms of business as usual. Those are a few years old now. Lots of new important data that we can update those with, so that we are starting this next climate action plan with the most up-to-date and clearest sense of where we stand. So a lot of the science and data subcommittees work is those kind of, focusing on those scientific underpinnings of the climate action plan. It is reviewing analysis that is contracted by the Climate Action Office or other state agencies, for which a review and feedback process would be really helpful. And so we've been doing that on life cycle analysis, and we anticipate, and I think at our next meeting there'll be an update on the different sets of contracts that are underway for science-based analysis that should where the science and data subcommittee can play a helpful review role. And then so going forward, I think the big questions for us are, is there anything, there's some very straightforward things that we know we need to update, but then there's also this question of how do we best be of service to other subcommittees? If there are technical questions where it would be helpful to have the committee play a review process. So definitely want to open up that invitation to other subcommittees. We want to be, at the service of the other subcommittees and the council if there are ways that we can be helpful beyond the primary ways we've already identified. The other thing I think we need to do is identify, we always want to have a liaison to each other subcommittee, which is important for every subcommittee, but it's especially important for us given our goal to be of service to all of the other subcommittees. And I think right now the only subcommittee that we don't have a liaison with is Ag and Ecosystems. So as that committee process moves forward, I think we will want to identify a liaison there. And yeah, Colin, what did I miss?
I think you covered everything that we talked about that I can think of. So yeah, don't think I have a lot to add. Thanks.
Super. Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Just transition.
Yeah,
Abby, you
happy
want to take that?
Go first. Yep. So Kelly's going to jump in and mention what I forget. So as far as where we are in our progress, Just Transition Subcommittee has continued to meet since the last CAP. We typically take the July and August months off, so a little bit of a summer break, but we've been meeting pretty consistently through the winter and spring. But we've just onboarded 8 new subcommittee members. So now the committee is a total of 16. And those new members are requiring some, training and focus around the Just Transition guiding principles, around the cooperative agreement, around how public engagement's happening, how we can use the assessment questions. So there's a lot of refamiliarizing the subcommittee, both established members and brand new members, with the guiding principles and how we can best use them. We're also, both Kelly and I think I can speak for us both, experiencing a little subcommittee leadership fatigue and some need for some additional co-chairs to step in, either adding a third to our duo or even some replacements. And we have not been successful yet of finding individuals that have capacity, that have representation from the administration and the steering committee. the last few meetings. So our April meeting was focused on just sort of a review and an update around the around the climate action plan. May was focused on kind of a review of the guiding principles, which we just had last week. And then our June meeting is designed to focus on public engagement with participation from the CBI team. We are establishing buddies for our new subcommittee members with established members for some kind of shared learning opportunities, and then really embracing this concept of liaisonship to other subcommittees. So identifying who has interest and capacity, especially with July and August being 2 months that we'll take off from just transition subcommittee meetings to really in earnest engage with your other committees. And then, I think one of our bigger conversations has been thinking through how to best use the guiding principles in this next drafting of the climate action plan. Some of the topics that seem to be emerging is that with new members and this new emphasis around the liaison role, just trying to get some clarity around how that relationship is established. So, do we wait for an invitation from co-chairs of other subcommittees? Do we attend? Is there space on every agenda for a just transition conversation? Or do we just pose kind of the equity and inclusion questions as they come up to ensure the just transition considerations? So I think we just have some general kind of process framing questions around that relationship. Some of our new subcommittee members are really bringing up the importance of using and having plain language in reference to the guiding principles so that they're very accessible and understandable. So that's something that we may even actually do some revisioning to the guiding principles, maybe make it into some sort of an infographic that can be digested and understood by a broader population. We are hopefully in advance of our June meeting, bringing some suggested questions that we would love to see included in the community engagement conversations that are happening as public engagement's happening across Vermont. So really just bringing forth some suggestions of the type of information and engagement we would recommend. I think we also as a subcommittee have gone through a little bit of a existential crisis of like, what is our purpose now that the guiding principles and assessment questions were developed for the last cap of like, what's our function as a subcommittee? So really trying to reaffirm, the liaison responsibility, sort of bringing the just transition concepts to every other subcommittee, representing voices of unheard community members as part of the community engagement process. So that could be a part of what those particular questions are that we'd love to see used by CBI. Becoming familiar with the quarterly reports that CBI submits so that we're just really familiar with the messages and the themes of concern and conversation that are coming up as part of the community engagement. And then considering whether it's attendance at other meetings across the community or recommending events that CBI should be attending to hear from impacted communities. And then last section, thinking about what support we need. We too have been thinking about the metrics of impact, wondering how that could better be collected, whether there's surveys that could be done to each subcommittee, soliciting how community engagement feedback may have changed your thinking or influenced your recommendations, either in the original climate action plan or in your efforts in developing recommendations for this second revised plan. Sophie's been really an amazing support to our subcommittee, but we do need some additional co-chair capacity. So we really need to sort of address that kind of leadership need. Only a few more things here, David. The climate action, the Just Transition Subcommittee recommended that there be a training again for the Climate Council around the Just Transition guiding principles. So I think that Kaya Morris did a training, but that was like 3+ years ago. And so, likely new steering committee and council members that it would be valuable to do another training. Members have brought up the accessibility of resources on the climate website. So how do we kind of access resources and understand what things are happening within the climate community? Finding the calendar tool a little bit difficult to work with. So those were some of the kind of suggestions that came up actually at our last meeting last week. Kelly, anything that I missed or that you'd reframe?
Maybe help to clarify. Yeah, so like the calendar is basically the only way you can get to the resources that were shared in a previous meeting easily. And or you can go through this long thing and try to search for stuff. So having it categorized with different, these are resources on this topic or meeting notes on this topic, and having, maybe not the meeting notes, but other things like presentations that have been shared, having them all in one place, because we keep being like, oh yeah, someone shared a thing, where is that? And we can't find it. So just like a suggestion that would probably fall under the Climate Action Office's role when I look that up. And now I'm gonna mute because my child is being noisy.
Okay. Thank you, Kelly. All right. That's helpful. All right, so we did the full round across our 5 subcommittees, and a couple things came up that perhaps we can even tackle right now. We have until 9:30, so we have another 15 minutes. So I'm curious, co-chairs and steering committee members, when you're hearing each other speak like this, what are some things you'd want to spend some time on? Like, for instance, the issue of the clear lanes and the questions that Andrea, David brought up, and Rich, I see you replied in the chat. Like, we could talk about that for a moment. We could talk about how Just Transitions liaisons work and how subcommittee co-chairs want to incorporate those liaisons into the conversation or make agenda, sort of standing agenda moments for that. I don't know. Those are the kinds of things that I heard that maybe you'd want to jump into, but I'm curious, steering committee members and co-chairs, what do you think you'd like to jump into right now if we have 15 minutes to work on some of these overlap issues?
Since I have a burning question, I would suggest an open question session.
Okay. Yeah. What's your burning question, David?
Do we have access to Vermont's IT office? And the reason I'm asking is that I share Abby's concern and maybe Jared also about being able to find stuff. The body of information and work that the Climate Council has been putting out, especially for those of us who are continuing to play catch up because we were not part of the first 2 years of the operation of the council. And if the answer is yes, we have access to Vermont IT expertise, then could they take a look at the body of information that we have and figure out a way to make it easily accessible for members and the public? Because I agree, it's really hard to find stuff and get back to minutes and listen to the recording or find what you're looking for, or and I don't even know to whom to address that question in terms of access to IT, but I did notice that Julie came back online.
Yeah, I bet some combination of Julie and Jane have some thoughts about that.
Sure, I can start and Jane can maybe clean up after me. We do have a contract, not with ADS, but with a vendor to provide website support. And there's always a question of how much contract capacity we have available, but there may be an opportunity there to start to make some improvements. I think it's probably a relatively significant lift given the number of documents, but it at least put in place a better system going forward, and appreciate the feedback and concerns raised today. Certainly it is a challenge, and I often find myself trying to remember which meeting we had a conversation at so I can go back in and grab the document. So we can talk about that and come back with a proposed path forward.
Great. Great, because it came up, yeah, from two subcommittees, then really some interest. And I think what I'm hearing as well is, could things be organized by subcommittee and like the big ticket, the key things, easily accessible, sort of, so there's a pathway in that feels a little easier to deal with. Okay.
And I know it can be done because I use the legislative search engine for Vermont statutes, or the Lexis system for Vermont statutes all the time. And to go through all of the green books and come up with, and I find what I'm looking for. So there's a model out there that I think could be helpful.
Okay. Okay. Great. Other things on people's minds, when you heard this run through the subcommittees? Does anybody want to jump into that issue of how to handle things like weatherization that, are helpful both for resilience and emissions reduction? Rich? Or sorry, Julie, yeah.
I went back and grabbed our governance document about task groups. And I don't know if other subcommittees are proposing to create task groups. But those need to be approved by the steering committee and subject to council approval before creating them. And so I think just making sure we're following our own governance document as we're looking at how to organize our work for the next climate plan is going to be really important.
Julie, and I think the reason behind that was that we were trying to minimize the use of task groups. And there was two reasons for that. One was they sometimes become even more of a challenge from a staff capacity and keeping things running. And also because they're not an official subcommittee meeting, it's a different per diem situation, I think.
I think there is
right.
no per diem available because they're not officially created in statute. And yes, they can become, there's sort of need to have, I think, a fairly clear and defined scope, and just want to make sure that we're still comfortable with what we have in the governance document, and then also just encourage subcommittee chairs to the extent. I heard Rich specifically mention that cross-sector was looking at 3 task groups or maybe 4, and to the extent others are also thinking along those lines, because it did seem like based on the overviews, there were some pieces that might lend themselves to that we're all on the same page in terms of how to approach establishing them.
Yeah.
So I would add, I think we had one other concern relative to task groups, which was because they are unofficial, there's no public access to them particularly, and we wanted to make sure that the pieces that were important to have public access stayed in subcommittee and not in task group.
Yeah.
Agreeing with that, but I think then thanks for the reminder, Julie, that cross-sector will need to ask the steering committee for approval for those 3, the continuation really of those 3 task groups. And we will, I don't know how we do that, frankly, but whether we have to have another meeting in order to decide to ask, because we just had a meeting and decided to do it. Anybody have an opinion on that?
Well, I mean, yeah, I guess to formalize it on June, whenever we said June 10th or whenever we're going to meet. And I think I feel the pain of all of you in the subcommittees, because it does take work in between meetings to prepare to come together and actually review something. And that work requires people coming together, and, a task group is a pathway to do that. And so it's not like I have a great alternative pathway were it not for that. So I think, I guess what the urging is try to do as much as possible in your meetings that are, officially noticed meetings. And obviously, as you mentioned, Rich, as well, the sort of decision making happens there for sure. But it's just trying to avoid the sort of sprawling nature of, lots and lots of task groups that need to be supported and that don't have the same visibility in them as a
Right.
subcommittee meeting.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Callie, Jared, and Andrea, I noticed your hand was up at one point too, so you may have something to say there. Apologize. Callie?
I was gonna say the way that Rich characterized it as being like a working group. These are the people who are going to do the research and find out some ideas and throw things around and bring it back to the main group. Makes a lot of sense to me and seems like a good middle ground for what actually getting work done looks like and sticking with as much public meeting and transparency as possible. So I don't know how we'd do anything if we didn't have some meetings outside of public meetings, like co-chairs have to get together to plan our meetings. So that's sort of, that characterization feels fine to me.
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Jared?
Yeah, very much along the lines of what Kelly said and agreeing with her is that I think when we discussed it in the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee, it was a desire to find this medium between allowing background research, information gathering work to happen between meetings so that the meetings themselves could be more efficient and productive, but also wanting to make sure that there was good deliberation, good public process, transparency around any recommendations or decisions. And that was the kind of medium that we ended up at, which is the task groups would really be about background information gathering, doing the work between, but any formal recommendations or decisions would have to be made at the subcommittee level, not at a task group level. And I'll just say personally, I'm both comfortable with that and think that that's necessary for the work to proceed.
Yeah. Thanks, Jared. Jane?
Thanks. I just wanted to speak to two things. First, what happened during the last CAP and after was that we made task groups, but then we wanted them to be public meetings also. And that really added an administrative burden. So I just want to flag that if task groups are being used to support work products in between and there aren't decisions being made, that that we should not also have them as public meetings, because that's extra administrative work that sort of blurs the line between subcommittees and task groups. So just wanted to flag that because that was becoming challenging for us. And then second, I just also wanted to flag for folks' interest and update that we are hiring the climate planning administrator position. That's primary purpose is to support processes, administration, and documentation of templates and other tools for subcommittees in the council for the next CAP. I shouldn't say their only responsibility. Their other primary responsibility will be if we receive the CPRG implementation grant, and that those two job duties are very much aligned because, as you all know, we're thinking about the CAP as the deliverable for our CCAP for the climate pollution reduction grant. So those interviews are this week. And so we're really hopeful that position will start soon to help support administrative processes that you're discussing.
Thanks, Jane. Okay, we're 2 minutes left here. Anything burning, folks? Reactions? Opportunities for coordination? Rich, we trying to jump in there?
Yeah, it's not burning, but I'm stating again, I like the idea that Andrea and David put forward about just getting together. Maybe if it, at least initially, if it's just the co-chairs, just having a conversation about here is the Venn diagram on some of these issues that we think look like either one of the committees or both of the committees could be chewing on, but why don't we decide who's going to take the lead on it? And then the other folks can follow that and chime in and add as necessary, but everybody's not trying to do all the same work.
Yeah. I think weatherization is a great example of that, right? Because you could say, listen, cross sector is going to take the lead on that because it's such an important number, right, in the overall emissions place. And then rural resilience adaptation can coordinate with that. Like, hey, this is what cross sector is thinking about it. This is the impact it's going to have from a resiliency standpoint as well. So that's the kind of thing you could do.
Yeah, that's right. Or battery backup, is important for resilience, and it's also going to be important to the planning and policies for the power sector.
Right.
We could identify easily, I don't know, a dozen topics like that.
Great. Okay. Well, let's plan on it. I think that sounds really important. I think, Andrew, you had said it in your work plan over the summer to do that. Maybe we can do that a little before the summer. Once all the working groups have had a chance to kind of dive a little deeper into content. Callie, Abby, go ahead, please, and then we'll switch gears.
I was just going to add that I think another benefit of this idea is it'll help people compartmentalize their thinking, and because it's really hard, as David said, to have both the mitigation and the resilience and adaptation at the same time. They sometimes don't even fully overlap, and sometimes they super overlap. Like if you do more resilient farming practices, you're going to end up with mitigation as a result. But I think it will help people with their thinking to have these buckets and know which part you have to focus on primarily, and then coming together to talk about the overlap.
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah. Abby?
Yeah, mine is, and we may not have time for this, but it's just asking preference for liaison engagement from other subcommittees. So I know that was one of the themes that came up and that you mentioned, David, and I know that Just Transition liaisons are ready to engage. And I think that Sophie had, offered to help make the introduction or let the co-chairs of other subcommittees know who the liaison would be from Just Transition. So we may be able to administratively manage that piece, but I'm also just curious if we want to have just an organic engagement, like liaisons are there and they pipe up when they have something to offer, or if there's interest in actually a designated space and time on agendas for kind of raising Just Transition guiding principles or assessment question kind of content. So again, I don't know that we need to answer it now, but I think it's something to consider.
Thanks, Abby. I'm glad you brought it up again. Graham, is your hand about that?
So yes, you know what, I think we just need to be sensitive to the fact that it's occurring to me that a liaison from one committee to another, we are doubling the number of meetings that person attends. And just want to acknowledge that that's a big ask and express gratitude in advance for anyone who is willing to do that. And also want to express gratitude to all of the co-chairs. Again, just being reminded of how much work it is to be a co-chair and to organize this large body of work, and all the time you all are putting in, and the fact that it is exhausting. And so thank you.
Thanks, Bram. Billy, last word. We got to switch gears and do the
So
engagement
this
stuff.
conversation is concerning me a bit because when I read the guidance that the council has provided the steering committees, it's really fairly laser focused on identifying progress on past actions, identifying any gaps that remain in the plan, that are prioritizing the actions that are contained therein. And a lot of this conversation is reminding me of development of the initial plan, where we're talking about fairly sprawling topics and how to integrate Just Transitions into those conversations. And am I incorrect in my understanding that our task is to focus primarily on the existing CAP, to identify progress on actions, identify any gaps that remain, and then prioritize actions? We're not. Is that correct?
So I'm not sure the right person to answer that question, Billy, and your audio is a little bit off for some reason, your mics, but essentially you're saying, listen, you're feeling a little nervous about how sprawling the topically things have sounded in this call, and you want to remind, your interpretation is it's really, we're about reviewing the existing cap, looking for gaps, addressing those gaps, right? And so steering committee members, you're probably in the best place of anybody to answer that. Again, I don't want to get into a big conversation right now about this because we have some other things to do. But Julie, your hand's up.
Yeah, I just want to say my understanding is consistent with Billy's, that this is not intended to be a wholesale rewrite of the climate plan, but rather an update and addressing gaps that we see that have arisen in the interim since the initial plan was published, and hope that we're all on the same page with that, and it can help narrow and tailor the scope of work, because I think somebody just jumping into the conversation certainly could have been left with the impression that Billy just shared about essentially looking at it like a global rewrite of the climate action plan.
Right. Okay, great.
If I could, David,
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I'm not sure that we can remain static in terms of the scope of the issues. I'm not saying that we don't need to make choices about what we address, but at our meeting, it was pointed out to us that since the adoption of the first climate action plan, the plan left out health. And what we had was a major pandemic of COVID that interjected itself into our daily lives. And if people need anything in the way of resilience, it's to medical emergencies. And so I understand that this may be a limited scope, but as we move forward, we are going to discover that we left something out, or that the whole situation has changed and we need to address it in a different way. So I don't want hard boundaries, but some sensitivity to the amount of work new things create.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So thanks, everyone. I really appreciate this exercise, and I think let's do it again soon-ish, and deal with some of these overlapping issues in particular. And I think if folks are having questions about the right balance on this last conversation we just have of updating existing plan versus, venturing forth into many new areas, we can help get that balance right in future conversations as well. All right. So Jane and Sophie are here to talk about an idea for sort of doing a more public kickoff to this process of updating the climate action plan. And so I'll turn it over. Jane, are you going to prep this up? Okay.
Thank you. I'm going to prep it up, and then I'm going to have Sophie share her screen and walk folks through the details. Just want to remind folks that Sophie joined us at, I believe it was our last steering committee meeting, might have been the one before, and walked you all through our vision for engagement for the next year from the Climate Action Office, which was a multi-pronged approach to supporting public meetings, as well as focus groups, stakeholder events, and meeting people where they are. And so those materials and that Gantt chart that lays out the vision for the climate action plan, as well as how that's working in consultation with the engagement we're doing for the resilience implementation strategy, those documents can be found apparently not that easily, because we just discussed how hard they are to find, but at the last steering committee meeting calendar online, and I can drop it in the chat while Sophie's talking too about the ask for today. We plan to hold kickoff events for the climate action plan, sort of letting folks know about the update to the CAP and inviting them into the process, letting them know where the touch points will be with the public along the way, as well as the vision for how folks can engage with subcommittees, the council, and others in the process. Sophie, David, and I, through David's contract with CBI, have met and talked very much in detail about what those events look like for June, and want to walk those through with you today and remind folks that these are really Climate Council events. And so our ask is here for you to show how the Climate Action Office can support them, but really they should be led and guided by the Climate Council, you all as the leaders of this work. And so Sophie's going to pull up her screen, walk through. There are specific asks for all of you. And then based on your feedback and guidance today, we have 2 dates set for these. And our idea is to go forward and start to advertise and share those events widely so that folks will show up. So go ahead, Sophie, you have it turned up. And at the same time, I'll drop in the chat the Gantt chart that shows how these meetings fit into the overall vision for engagement for the CAP this time.
Great. Thank you, Jane. And is my audio coming through for everybody okay?
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, you sound great.
Great. Okay, so I'll just walk us through the overview that we're proposing for the CAP kickoff events, which we propose to hold in June on the week of the 17th. Once we conclude today's meeting, I can send out those invitations. I put up top here that I have perhaps lofty, but I think it's a great goal to have all counselors and subcommittee co-chairs attend one event. There's going to be 2 options. And then it would be great to have at least half of all subcommittee members attend an event. And, you know, if folks can't make it, these will be recorded and we'll have notes from the breakout room. So really be able to integrate what is heard during this event into the climate action planning process. So I'll walk us through our proposed agenda, and then what we'll do is offer space for any feedback or propose, changes, amendments to how the flow of the event will go, and then also hopefully get some folks who want to volunteer to take on some of these agenda items and present to the public on this. So we'd like to kick it off with welcome and introductions, and we'd love to have this shared between 1 legislatively appointed counselor and 1 administrative counselor. In this introduction, have a little bit of an interaction opportunity for people who are attending, Vermonters who are attending via a poll to get a sense of who's in the room. Then have those counselors explain what is the Climate Council exactly and what are the subcommittees. That includes some background of, the Global Warming Solutions Act is what has set this all up. So that's the introduction, give that background context. Then we come down to having a high level overview of the climate action plan, proposing that Jane heads this up. That would include what are you going to find in the CAP, a broad overview of the sections. We thought that maybe giving 2 really tangible, concrete examples of actions that have advanced could be helpful. We could do 1 action that has advanced via legislative activities and 1 action that has advanced via a state agency's activities to kind of show the various types of actions that are included in the plan. And then explain, here's what the CAP is, how exactly does it work, how can it be used, that it exists as a guide and roadmap for how to achieve the state's climate goals that were set forward in the Global Warming Solutions Act, and explain how does it have that teeth or the power behind it. Then we'll get a little more specific with those subcommittees. What are they doing specifically within their jurisdiction on this climate action plan update? Again, we'd like to have 1 legislatively appointed counselor and 1 administrative counselor take this part on. And it would be wonderful if those were different counselors from who did the intro so that we're really having a broad representation within this event. Then we'd like to turn to David to kind of frame up the breakout rooms and David will kind of be moving the event along between various people to help us just kind of have that flow. We're proposing that these breakout rooms, so that means small groups in Zoom, rather than having this whole meeting with say 70 people, we'd be able to break people out into groups of maybe 15 or 20 people. In each of these groups, we're proposing that each group would focus on one of those focal areas that are defined in what the steering committee has put forward as guidance for the subcommittees. So there's focal areas around cross-sector mitigation, around rural resilience and adaptation, and around ag and ecosystems. And then having, subcommittee members from just transitions or science and data, dispersed in those breakout groups as is possible is great for their, cross-cutting role. And then just thinking about, having ample representation from subcommittees and counselors as is possible within those breakout rooms. Here in those breakout rooms, we're proposing that Climate Action Office and Consensus Building Institute staff members can provide facilitation support, but really aiming to have the subcommittee co-chair and the counselor that are present in these breakout groups be able to be prepped with questions so that there is that direct interaction between members of the public, Vermonters who are in the conversation, and counselors and co-chairs. So the breakout rooms, those would last, let's see, we've got them lasting for about 25 minutes. Then we come back, bring everybody back from the breakout rooms, ask a couple of questions for reflection so we can get a sense of what's happened across those breakout rooms. And then we propose to wrap up by letting people know how they can stay involved. We had a thought here that perhaps a Just Transitions co-chair or a counselor who sits on Just Transitions could lead this part, and I can support them in that, talking about the various mechanisms that the public will have the option of, giving their input to the Climate Action Office or participating in future engagement activities. That concludes my overview. David, do you think we should dive into feedback before getting into like volunteers for particular roles in this event?
Yeah, why don't we just give a second if folks have questions about these events. Again, we're thinking it's 2 opportunities to do the same thing, right? So there's two different time slots to do this. Do folks have any questions for Sophie about the thought behind this? The agenda that was presented here, any feedback or thoughts or questions? Graham?
Can you just quickly share any initial thoughts that actually anyone has had about how we're going to invite the public to join these meetings?
Yeah.
Sophie, you could speak to that.
Sure.
Sophie has a really great network now that we use and a process for when we host our public meetings.
Yeah, and there's a couple of various tactics that I've been using. I'll just name a few. One includes posting to the free community calendars in local newspapers across the state. Another includes working with partners who do relevant work and have email listservs if they are interested in sharing that with their email listservs. And just to also name that I really welcome further ideas for sharing out. We're working across an entire state, and there's certainly many more opportunities to share these events than I have on my list. So we'll, in addition to sharing these out to the council and the subcommittees and asking you all to share with your networks, which will be a really important step. If you have further ideas that you think I can integrate into my promotion and outreach, I'm all ears, and please be in touch to let me know.
Great, thank you.
And Bram, I also say that part of what we've been doing with Sophie and Jane is all the work we've been doing on focus groups with different types of Vermonters, different populations, showing up at events in the last several months. We've been asking people who want to share their contact information if they'd be interested to get this kind of information. So we've been building a list of people who aren't typically involved in these kinds of events, precisely for this reason.
That's great.
Other questions, feedback, thoughts?
David, I guess I'm going to ask it. I probably already know the answer. I think Sophie touched on it, but I want to make sure that we are using the traditional newspaper, radio, and television news outlets. The reason is that many of my friends have no contact with social networking, nor the listservs, nor anything else, but they do read the weekly paper or the daily paper if it still prints daily. And I just want to make sure that we're still using those outlets.
Sophie?
Yeah, so David, that what I mentioned of like the community newspaper events, those are all through like local community papers. I've got a list of all the free calendars that are on community newspapers across the state. We also work with our communications coordinator for the Agency of Natural Resources to do press releases when appropriate. So we've been talking with her about if and how we would do one for this. And she's kind of, it's balanced with other Agency of Natural Resources things. It sounds like there's an opportunity to do one for this event. So we're having that conversation, and I'll keep you posted, and hopefully we'll hear something about it on Vermont Public or Vermont Digger, et cetera.
Good, thank you.
Thanks, Sophie. Rich?
Well, really two questions. One is, Sophie, are you planning to use the Front Porch Forum? I agree with David's point, by the way, that there are a lot of people who aren't on social media, but they do read Front Porch Forum.
Yeah, and honestly, social media is not I don't think that's like the most effective way, just to name that, like, the Agency of Natural Resources social media is not how most people are hearing about this. So that's really not like the focus of promotion at all. Front Porch Forum, we've gotten a bunch of help from other staff. That's going to be another ask of council members and subcommittee members. You all are spread across the state, so your help putting these on your local Front Porch Forums is really super appreciated, amongst the staff that, like, I have contact with. A lot of them are in central Vermont or Chittenden County, so we can cover our bases pretty well there. But if you're a counselor or a subcommittee member who lives in far southern Vermont or far northern Vermont, those are contacts that I have less of. So your help in sharing these Front Porch Forum is incredibly appreciated. Over time, it will be really interesting to see if there's some kind of opportunity for doing ads on Front Porch Forum, because that can just really allow us to make sure it gets to all corners rather than, just the sort of spotty nature of who happens to live in these different communities. But we're not quite there yet with figuring out the ad mechanism for our particular, budget and funding, what funding is being allowed to be spent on.
My second point just goes to what I'm sure is just an ongoing, problem, which is that sometimes it's really difficult to ask Vermonters or anybody to express an opinion about really complicated matters without providing them with a decent grounding of basic information. And the process of deliberative polling is a process that gives people information upon which they can then form an opinion. And I realize that what you're describing here is not that kind of outreach. But I do wonder whether at some point in the process of trying to deal with complex climate policy issues in Vermont, if we could have a process that's more, how do you say it, sort of bidirectional in terms of giving people information, hearing what they have to say, hearing what their questions are, giving them more information, then asking them, well, what would you do?
Yeah. I don't know, Sophie and Jane, you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can just briefly say I think you captured well, like an ongoing challenge of community engagement that is, you know, will persist. One thing that I think one way that we're trying to address that in like the overarching longer view of community engagement is by having these like touch points and ongoing showing up in communities and providing that baseline information. Obviously, that's like, you know, a very small number of people compared to all Vermonters. We're going to have people showing up who have various levels of context. So I think for this particular event, doing the best we can in those intro sections to give the most important information that can allow somebody to participate is one way of addressing that. We also did put at the end of like having a survey, which would really welcome, you know, thoughts on how to make that the most useful that it can be in terms of the questions that are meaningful to you all. But yeah, I think like making sure that these events aren't the only touch points and that there are opportunities for people to engage in a longer, more sustained kind of a way so that those conversations can be ongoing is an important factor.
Thanks. And I'll just quickly note as well, Rich, there's a set of conversations planned in the fall that are designed to be more detailed and substantive, and sort of a little bit more stakeholder, smaller group type conversations. They're getting more into the substance. Jared, last word, and we got two quick things we need to do before you finish up.
Thanks. I just had a quick clarifying question for Sophie, and that is, when you talk about the possibility of a survey, are you primarily thinking about a survey of the participants who attend the meeting, or a broader survey? I think overall, I just want to give you kudos. I think this is a really well thought out, intentional agenda. I like many elements of it. The one thing that I continue to have some kind of questions and concerns about is, how are we going to engage? My sense is that the people who are most likely to come out to an event like this are the ones who care the most, either for or against these issues, and that have the most interest. And I still have this question about, and maybe it's later in the process, and forgive me if I've forgotten an element of this timeline, but, you know, I thought, for instance, a great example was how well done the Public Service Department survey was ahead of the Renewable Energy Standard conversation. I mean, very large sample size, looking, you know, paying attention to questions of, you know, demographics and how representative it was. You know, it's always important to hear from people who care passionately on multiple sides of an issue, but I do hope that as part of our public engagement, we're hearing, we have an ability to also hear from a representative sample of Vermonters, and I imagine that would happen better through a survey that would complement these public meetings, where I think we're going to be hearing primarily from the people who care the most about the issue overall, or some specific portion of it, which again is important, but I just don't want that to be seen as necessarily representative of broad demographics. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple things, and I'll share kind of like what we've done so far, with the caveat that like there's way more to do and that this is like just the start. So the list that David mentioned over the past year of Consensus Buildings Institute's work, which has been intentionally kind of showing up in places where climate outreach maybe hasn't been before, and trying to speak with people who will be feeling the impacts of climate change perhaps more acutely, or can't respond to them in the same way that people with more resources can. So with that outreach, they've been getting people's contact information, signing them up for email lists, and we'll be continuing to show up in those places and more. We're trying to expand that across the state. So there's this one component of these virtual public meetings, kind of standard. We're going to share these meetings with that email list and hope that some people who maybe haven't shown up to the conversation before are able to make it. That being said, it takes a lot of effort to make it to public meetings as well. And as Rich said, you know, you kind of need some background information. Yes. And just to clarify that I'm collaborating very closely with Consensus Building Institute, and we're in this work together, as Jane notes in the in the chat. So we're really trying to take that model and go more broadly statewide. Like, we've really kind of piloted it in Chittenden County and Washington County so far. And so including these conversations and these questions in our outreach activities, where we're showing up in communities where people already are, say at a community dinner or at a community music event.
Sophie, I'm just going to give you a quick heads up. It's top of the hour, so we're going to need to round things up here, unfortunately.
Okay.
But I think there's more conversation to be had, and I wonder if we can circle back in the next steering committee meeting about this bigger question of outreach to make sure folks feel comfortable and they can hear
Can I have
more.
one short thing, David?
Yeah.
I would highly recommend, if you haven't yet, to read the quarterly engagement reports that I've sent out. Those are also findable on our resources section on the website. That gives you a really deep dive into the things I'm talking about, and is a shortcut.
Yeah. That's great.
Send them around, Sophie.
Yeah, they're in your email.
It's in your inbox.
David. They're there. So we needed to do one quick thing as a steering committee before we, two quick things. One is just transitions liaisons. There are some, and you all need to approve that per your governance process. Jane or somebody, is there something you can flash on the screen with that, or? Okay.
Yeah, I just want to also note, so there are liaisons that are now on all subcommittees, except we don't have one for science and data yet. So Abby and Kelsey agreed to serve on Ag and Eco, cross sector, Callie. And then rural resilience has Anna Gunther and Danielle Bombardier. I also wanted to note that Brian Woods and Rich and Melissa, I apologize if we didn't speak about this, but Brian obviously has been participating in cross-sector more intentionally since Megan's departure from our office. And so we'd like to have him take Megan's seat on the subcommittee if that makes sense. So we put those changes all forward here and know that science and data will still need a Just Transitions liaison, or perhaps they don't because of the work, but that I can ask that of all of you. So, and Sam Lash, sorry.
Oh, and Claire.
Just quickly, Claire has been serving as our liaison. Claire McElveny has been serving as the liaison between Just Transitions and Science and Data. I don't know if she's
not on Just Transitions, just so you know, technically, but she staffs Just Transitions as able. But yeah.
Okay.
And she's obviously an official member of Science and Data, so that works great.
Okay.
I'm gonna stop sharing. I'll just
Wait,
note
hang on one second. There's some
concern is that rural resilience has a lot of members. I want to flag that. There are now 18 subcommittee members for rural resilience, which could be viewed both as an opportunity or a challenge.
Okay. Any concerns with you all as a steering committee approving these liaisons as Jane just shared on the screen? Okay. Thanks, everyone.
I'm sorry. I thought rural resilience was already like, I don't know what just happened with the numbers. Did we just add numbers? Did we just get more people? I thought we were like really concerned about having way too many already. Now we have 3 transitions.
Yeah, that's a great point, Andrea, because Paula does sit on both subcommittees. I think there has been some interest that Paula has shared, but there hasn't been a conversation yet really thoughtfully about this, is that Paula, with the liaisons from Just Transitions, might step back from rural resilience and be able to then support Kelly in the transition of leadership on that Just Transition subcommittee.
Right.
But yeah, right, I do, yes, there were two, it was originally 3 Just Transitions folks who wanted to serve on Rural Resilience. We pushed one of them to Ag and Eco, but yeah, you still have 2 additional members, so I'm not sure how to handle that.
Really hard to
Yes,
schedule
you're-
this meeting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
please listen to her.
Okay. Folks, it's getting late. Rich and then Abby, and let's try to circle up here.
Mike, this will be quick. It's great to have Brian on the committee. That's fine, with me anyway. I don't see Melissa. But Brian was also providing staff support to the committee. And I would appreciate it knowing whether we're going to continue to be able to call on him for staff support.
Well, we're going to have to talk about, we'll probably have to think about the way CAO staff shows up to all the subcommittees. Honestly, the way that it worked last time will not be the same this time. So we're just going to have to think about, he is still an expert, has expertise in the thermal sector. So I imagine he would help support Christine and David, but probably all of it in a different level than the last time. Especially with Brian helping lead and staff the Cap and Invest study.
Okay. Abby?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just going to go back to the comment that Andrea, you were making around the adding numbers to the subcommittees. I think from the Just Transitions perspective, the multiple members are designed to serve as a backup so that the responsibility to attend another meeting is not on just the shoulders of one subcommittee member, but that, like if Kelsey can't make a meeting, then I would attend. Or if Paul is not there, then maybe Danielle or Anna would be able to attend a meeting. Or it may even depend upon the day of the week or the time that the meetings are scheduled as to when Just Transition subcommittee members can be there. Many of them are working and are only able to attend meetings in the evening. So I just want to note, I don't think the intention was to add 2 or 3 additional members to every other subcommittee meeting, but hopefully have the ability for one to attend most meetings. That's helpful.
Okay. Thanks, folks. So we are losing our quorum rapidly. And so I just want to note that the time is running away from us, unfortunately. I did want to say, if there's anybody here who was planning on making a public comment, I want to make sure I leave the space for that. There's only one person here who I don't recognize. Kelsey?
Hi, I'm from the Just Transitions and I'm new, so I had the opportunity to log on, so I was just learning more. But thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Kelsey. I'm glad you're here. All right. Super. Well, thank you, everyone. And we will meet on June 10th. It feels like there's some issues that we could work out between now and then. And I think sort of that last back and forth, Rich and Jane, about sort of support and who's supporting what and the sort of staff support, I think is something that maybe could be carried on sort of bilaterally, and you can figure that out. I'll be in touch if you need anything. We'll see you on June 10th. All right. I think that's it for us today. Take care, everybody.